guys, welcome back to The Victim's Voice. I am your host, Lorelei. This week's case is another one out of Canton, Massachusetts. In the wake of the Karen Reed case, this case started receiving attention, and people are starting to wonder if this isn't another case of a police cover up, especially because it involves some of the same officers and the same chain of command in both cases. What we do know is that it's definitely a case of corruption and unethical officers. This is the case of Sandra Birchmore. Even though Sandra Birchmore didn't have the best childhood and things were hard for her, she always tried to stay optimistic and always had a smile on her face. In school, Sandra was a bit socially awkward and got bullied relentlessly, which led to her spending a great deal of time in the guidance counselor's office. Sandra also seemed to get along better with the teachers at school than with her fellow peers, which also put a target on her back for the constant bullying. She was often said to exaggerate things and embellish stories to try to get attention from people. One of her teachers described her as very needy. This is because Sandra craved the acceptance of others, especially adults, and just wanted people to love her and wanted to fit in somewhere. Sandra had never had a father figure growing up. She didn't speak to her birth father, and her stepfather died when she was just a little girl. She and her chronically ill mother, Denise, moved around a lot. Sometimes they lived by themselves, and other times they stayed with Denise's aunt and uncle, Claire and Gerald Goodday. For most of her life, Birchmore believed they were her maternal grandparents. But they had to work to put food on the table and a roof over Sandra's head. So Sandra didn't get a lot of attention at home. It wasn't that her family didn't love her, because they absolutely did. They were just busy making ends meet and trying to get by. Birchmore had no one on her father's side. She never even knew her dad. Her mother gave her the last name of her late husband, who died years before Birchmore was born. Because she had never had a male role model to look up to as a child, Sandra looked up to authority figures, especially police officers. Sandra respected them and admired them so much that she hoped to become one someday, and she would do anything she could to get herself closer to fulfilling that dream. When Sandra was 11, she started learning self defense, working out, and doing other activities that would help her physically prepare for her goals, such as Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and cardio kickboxing at the local gym. Then, in 2010, when Sandra was 12, she finally got to join the Explorers. The Explorers was a group that was run by the local police department and was offered to the kids in the area. There was the Explorers Club, which was for middle schoolers who were in 6th to 8th grade. And then there was the Explorers Post, which was for older youth, ages 14 to 20. According to a 2019 Bloomington, Massachusetts police press release, the Explorer program is a quote, nationwide career oriented program for young men and women ages 14 to 20. The program provides young people an opportunity to learn about a career in law enforcement and a chance to network with sworn police officers in the community. It teaches important life and career skills to young people from all backgrounds through immersive career experiences and mentorship provided by community and business leaders. It equips young people with character, leadership, and life skills that can be used currently in their lives or in their future careers. End quote. Kids in the Explorer program at the police department get to go on ride-alongs, participate in police academy type activities, and learn what the job of a police officer entails. There used to be thousands of Explorer programs all over the United States. Although other career fields have them, the most popular Explorer program was the one that is run through the police departments. Over the last few decades, however, these programs have dwindled in size. Last year for the Explorer program in Stoughton was 2016, the last year that Sandra participated. Officer Robert Devine was the officer who was in charge of the Explorers when Sandra started in 2010. He had started running the Explorer program at the Stoughton Police Department in 2001, alongside fellow officers 25-year-old Matthew Farwell and his twin brother William Farwell. The Farwell brothers had been part of the Explorers when they were kids, just like Sandra. They also wanted to grow up to be police officers, which is a goal they managed to achieve. The Farwell brothers seemed to look up to Robert Devine when they were in the Explorers. He showed them the ropes and helped them to become leaders in the group. And even as they grew up and became police officers, Robert still seemed to keep them under his wing. The numbers in the program had been way down until Devine took over and started running mock police academies. And by 2011, he had more than 300 kids that came through the program. Devine was quoted as saying that the Explorers were more than training for a career in law enforcement. Some kids find a home in the Explorers. Devine considered himself to be a father figure to a lot of the kids in the Explorers, and also in the Stoughton schools where he worked as a resource officer. This seemed to be the right fit for Sandra, as she had been looking for a father figure her entire life. Being in the program made Sandra's infatuation with the police force grow. She often would wear a police uniform. She took pictures of her and the officers and posted them on Facebook. She couldn't wait to join the force herself one day. Everyone in the Explorers program called Sandra one tough cookie because even though she was tiny, she could do everything that the bigger kids could do. The officers in the program became like the family Sandra never had. After she had been there a while, they would ask her to join them at restaurants for dinner, take her on ride-alongs, and added her on their Facebook. She even would babysit for some of the officers at their homes. Sandra finally felt like she found her place in the world, somewhere that she could fit in and had male role models to look up to. Or at least that's what she thought at the time. Predators always prey on the vulnerable. Denise was thrilled when Sandra joined the program. Denise would do anything for her daughter, but she also had to support her financially. So being in the Explorers was a win-win situation. While Denise was working to provide for Sandra, she knew her daughter was in a safe, positive environment where she would learn valuable skills. I mean, what could be safer than your child hanging around a bunch of police officers, right? It was well known that the young girls in the Explorers program tended to flirt with some of the officers, and Sandra was no different. I mean, they were teenage girls, and these were mostly 20 something police officers. Of course, they were going to have harmless crushes, but it was up to the adults to make sure it stayed that way, harmless. But we will soon find out that it didn't stay that way. Not at all, and not even close. Most of the adults on the force either turned a blind eye to what was happening or participated in it. In 2016, when Sandra was 19, she was met with tragedy. Her mom, the person who had stood by her side her whole life, died at the age of 52. Then, just 3 months later, Sandra lost her grandmother. Sandra was broken after the loss of these two women who made a profound impact on her life. This led to her spending more time with the officers from the Explorers. They were all she had at this point. Sandra felt like a lost soul, and they were the only constant in her life besides her aunt. But tragedy struck again in 2019, when at the age of 22, Sandra lost her aunt. The three women who had raised Sandra her entire life were gone, and Sandra felt all alone. People said that after this, Sandra changed and seemed to crave stability and love even more than before, which left her even more vulnerable. She was naive, a bit immature, and trusted everyone. She had a childlike personality even into young adulthood, as she continued trying to make connections with people and fulfill her desire to be loved. But she was determined to continue following her dream to become a police officer. So that same year, in 2019, Sandra took the Massachusetts Civil Service exam and was put on the list of eligibility to join the Stoughton Police Department. In the meantime, Sandra was a teacher's assistant at East Middle School in the Sharon Public School District in Sharon, Massachusetts. Sandra loved kids and couldn't wait to go in every day to make a difference in their lives. She would spend her own money to pay for materials for projects she would do with the kids. Because of Sandra's own childlike energy, the kids at the school loved her and were close to her. This energy, however, made it hard for some of the adults to be around her and get close to her. Sandra had made a couple of close friends at her job at the school. Most of her coworkers described her as a nice, friendly girl, but she was very immature for her age. Sandra seemed to have a tendency to divulge too much information about herself to people that she wasn't really very close to, like the fact that she was seeing a married man and that he was a Staunton police officer. She told people that eventually he was going to leave his wife and they were going to be together. Then everyone received a big shock when in late December of 2020, Sandra revealed to her coworkers that she was pregnant and the father was this married man. She said he wasn't happy about the pregnancy at all and that he wanted her to terminate it. She had even told some people that he had become violent with her and had shoved her at one point and even choked her. But no matter what he did or said, Sandra was determined to be a good mother. She said that she was going to have the baby and that if he didn't want to be a part of his or her life, then that was fine. Sandra would raise the baby herself. In late January, just a few days before Sandra was found dead, she had told one of her close friends from the school that her and the baby's father had gotten into a bad fight about whether he would be on the birth certificate or not. On January 31st, 2021, a Category 3 blizzard hit Canton, Massachusetts. So when Sandra didn't show up to work on Tuesday, February 2nd, her fellow coworkers thought she might have just taken the day off because of the snowstorm. Or by this time, she was 3 months pregnant. So maybe she just wasn't feeling good. Either way, no one really thought much of it the first day that Sandra missed work. The next day, on February 3rd, though, people were starting to worry when Sandra still didn't show up. And not only that, she had been a no-call, no-show both days. This wasn't like Sandra at all. She never missed work unless it was absolutely necessary. And if she did, she always called to let them know what was going on. And something else was bugging one of Sandra's friends from the school. Just the week before, Sandra had told her that if something were to happen to her, it was her boyfriend that did it. So by February 4th, everyone at the school was worried. They had not heard anything from Sandra in 3 days. This is when Michael Hawking, the Sharon School Resource Officer, called the Canton Police and spoke to Patrolman Codard and asked them if they would do a well-being check on Sandra. Codard and Officer Brady arrived at the Canton Apartments at 3307 Windsor Woods Way on February 4th at around 11 a.m. They knocked on Sandra's door, but no one answered. Codard contacted his sergeant, who told him to try to locate Sandra's car. They walked out to the parking lot and noticed a car that was more noticeable than the rest. It had a wall of snow built up around it and feet of snow that covered it that was undisturbed. The other cars in the parking lot had been cleaned off to some point, but this car, it had been sitting there through the entire blizzard. It had not snowed since Tuesday morning, and this was now Thursday. They clean the plates off and run the number, and they find that it is in fact Sandra's car. At this point, they have a feeling something is wrong, so they decide to check out Sandra's apartment. They go find the apartment manager, and he lets them in. As soon as they open the door, Sandra's cats came running to them, meowing loudly, and a horrible smell that the officers knew all too well came rolling out of the apartment door. As they walked in, they noticed that the combined kitchen and living room area was a disaster. Things were thrown around everywhere. The kitchen counter was completely covered with junk mail, medications, and trash. Boxes of papers and random stuff looked like they had been poured out on the couch and floor. They started calling Sandra's name, but there was no answer. They walked further in and looked in the open bathroom door, but there was no Sandra. However, they did notice that everything in this room was neat and organized, unlike the rest of the apartment so far. They walked to the next door and it was closed, but there was a weird light coming from under the door. They pushed the door open and find that it was the bedroom. The strange light was coming from the Christmas lights that were around the window. The room was in disarray just as the living room and kitchen were. The bed was unmade and bags were emptied everywhere. On the floor straight ahead of them was Sandra, and the officers knew she was dead and had been for some time. There was lividity of the skin and face, her extremities were frozen by rigor mortis, and dried blood was around her mouth. She was found sitting on her bedroom floor, legs straight out in front of her, with her cell phone next to her knee, just out of reach. She had the strap from a gym bag tied around her neck, and the other end around the closet doorknob. This is a very unusual way for someone to take their own life, but not completely unheard of. This way of doing it is called a partial suspension. Unlike a regular hanging, Sandra would have had to apply the pressure herself to her neck to cut off her breathing. This is not only an extremely painful way to take your own life, but also a very complicated way because it requires the person to intentionally deprive themselves of oxygen for over a minute. It would be very hard for someone to do this because of the fight or flight response. Most of the time, a person would do something where they wouldn't have the chance to change their mind, such as jump off a bridge or some other elevated place. The way Sandra died is most often only seen done by inmates in prison, who have no other means or opportunity to do it. The officers checked Sandra's body but found no defensive wounds, bruising, swelling, or any signs of a struggle. Canton firefighter Daniel Whitley arrived and Sandra was pronounced dead at the scene at 11:46 a.m. on February 4th, 2021, at just 23 years old and 3 months pregnant. Investigators wanted to get a more accurate time of when Sandra died, so they went to the apartment manager and asked to see the CCTV footage of the building. The one camera that they had showed a view of the front doors and the elevator that sat to the left as you came in the front doors. As they are looking at the footage, they noticed that the last time that Sandra is seen is on Monday, February 1st. She is seen multiple times that day, and each time she seems engrossed in something on her phone. She was seen getting food delivered, picking up packages from the apartment building mailroom. She even picked up a baby seat that she had ordered, which showed that she was planning for the future, for her baby that she was going to have in a few months. At around 5:44 p.m., she is seen going outside with a snow scraper, presumably to scrape the snow off of her car, like she was maybe planning on going somewhere later that day or to work the next morning. I don't think anyone who has a plan to take their own life is going to worry about cleaning the snow off of their car first. I mean, I know sometimes the choice to take your own life isn't planned. Sometimes it's an in the moment decision, but this still seems weird to me. She was going about her day as normal, so what changed? At 5:46 p.m., she is seen entering the elevator, and it's assumed she went back to her apartment. That's the last time Sandra is seen on the footage, or seen alive at all. However, something later on in the footage caught the officer's eye. At around 9:15 p.m., a strange man appeared. He came in the front doors, but you couldn't really see his face to make out who he was. He's looking down most of the time as he walks over to the elevator and hits the button for Sandra's floor. He's wearing jeans, a black hoodie with the hood up, black jacket, black work boots, and one of those disposable masks that doctors or surgeons wear, the kind people wore during COVID. This guy is huge compared to Sandra. Just to give you a visual for how big this guy was, there's a sanitizer machine on the wall above the buttons to the elevator, and the top of Sandra's head barely comes to the bottom of it. She's a normal sized girl, maybe a little shorter than average, but this guy, As he is waiting for the elevator to open and he's standing there, the hand sanitizer machine comes up to his shoulders. His head almost touches the top of the door frame when he walks into the building. He is humongous compared to Sandra. The man is seen leaving the building at 9:43 p.m. He once again is walking off the elevator and towards the door with his head down, and he is walking rather quickly. He was in the building a total of 28 minutes. The police checked with management office to see if anyone knew who this man was, but no one did. He wasn't a resident of the building as far as anyone knew, and none of the other residents in the building saw or heard anything that night. Sergeant Michael Lank arrived and an initial investigation was performed. I'm sure that name sounds familiar. We mentioned him a lot in the Karen Reed case. He and the other officers took pictures of Sandra's apartment. There on the kitchen counter, among all the clutter, was a sonogram with Sandra's name on it. Sandra's death was ruled a suicide, and foul play was ruled out. In the police report, the officers stated there was no scuff marks on the walls, no drag marks on the carpets or floors. They also wrote, quote, "Despite the clutter, all items appeared to have been in their intended locations, and no items appear to have been knocked over or thrown about in an unintended manner." End quote. How did they come to that conclusion? This seemed to be more than a person being a little messy. Do people normally have boxes of stuff that they poured all over their couch? Is that where those items were intended to go? I would have to see this officer's home if that's the case. They made it sound like Sandra was just a messy person, but this seemed to be much more than someone who didn't pick up after themselves. This seemed like it was done by someone searching for something. And what about this unknown suspicious looking man who entered the building and went to Sandra's floor for just a short 28 minutes, then left quickly? Were they looking into who he was and what he was doing there? They took a look through Sandra's phone, hoping that would shed some light on what might have made her want to take her own life and give them some idea of when she had done it. Usually, people who take their own life leave something, a note, a text, something to say goodbye to the people they loved, or to say that they're sorry for what they did. But there was none of that with Sandra. After looking through her phone, they figured that Sandra died sometime during the evening of Monday, February 1st, since all contact through her phone ceased after that. As they looked through Sandra's phone, however, they found something else that stopped them in their tracks. There were lots of police officers in Sandra's phone, and there were thousands upon thousands of messages between Sandra and police officers at the Stoughton Police Department. These weren't all just friendly, how you doing messages either. There were very inappropriate messages and pictures, and most of the inappropriate messages and pictures were between Sandra and three officers. The day after Sandra's death on February 5th, Chief of Stoughton Police Donna McNamara was contacted by a detective from the Massachusetts State Police. He called to inform her that through text messages on Sandra's phone, they had reason to believe that Matthew Farwell and Sandra Birchmore had been in a sexual relationship since Sandra was just 15 years old and Matthew was 27. He was the married police officer she had told people that she was seeing. He had started having sex with Sandra a month before he married his wife, and the relationship had spanned for almost a decade. They also informed her that during their preliminary investigation, they had found that the tall mystery man that had been seen walking into Sandra's building on February 1st, the last day Sandra was seen alive, was in fact Matthew Farwell. Text messages on Sandra's phone show Matthew telling her that he had arrived and her telling him to come up to her apartment. From what they could tell, Matthew Farwell was the last person to see Sandra alive, so they definitely needed to talk to him. However, they stated they didn't have probable cause to charge him with a crime at that time. Chief McNamara then ordered Deputy Chief Brian Holmes to conduct an internal investigation into the unintended death of Sandra Birchmore. Friends and family of Sandra's had contacted law enforcement after her death to inform them of the sexual relationship between Matthew Farwell and Sandra, and said that it had been going on for an extended period of time. Sandra's mom's cousin, Angelique, reached out to investigators and said that Sandra was allegedly pregnant with Farwell's child and that she had been pressuring him to participate in the child's life. Things had not been going well between the two, and Angelique had told Sandra that she should lay off of pressuring him. Everyone that knew and loved Sandra had been concerned for her well-being prior to her death, and no one believed that Sandra would have taken her own life. She was excited to be a mother, and she knew there was a possibility that she might have to be a single mother, and she was okay with that. She wanted this baby more than anything. It was someone to love her unconditionally, like she had always wanted. She was happy and had already been buying things to prepare for the baby. The next day, on February 6th of 2021, 2 days after Sandra's body was found, Matthew Farwell was brought in and was questioned by the Massachusetts State Police. He told them he had known Sandra for, quote unquote, about 10 years and had met her when she was in the Explorers program. He was confronted with all of the hundreds of messages between him and Sandra that were found in her phone. The fact that she was telling people he was the father of her baby, and the fact that he had been at her apartment on the night they suspected was the night she had died. He admitted to having sexual relations with Sandra. However, he denied that it began when she was 15. He said that it didn't start until 2020, and that the last time they had been intimate was at the end of October of 2020. He said she told him in December that she was pregnant and had said the baby was his, but he was confident the baby wasn't his. He couldn't be the baby's father since Sandra was due to have the baby in September of 2021. That means she likely got pregnant in December. But he said that she told him she was pregnant in December. His dates aren't really adding up. He did admit that he was the one that was seen on the CCTV footage going into Sandra's building on the 1st. I mean, he couldn't really deny it. They had him on camera. And they had the text where he told Sandra he was there and she told him to come up. But according to him, he said he went there to quote unquote end their relationship. And that was it. But he had just said that they hadn't been intimate since October, 4 months earlier. So what relationship was he trying to end? He said that they had a pretty nasty argument and that she was screaming and crying and acting out of control. But he left anyway. He couldn't stick around and worry about Sandra. He had somewhere else to be. See, after he left her apartment that night, he went directly to the hospital, where 12 hours after he was seen leaving Sandra's apartment at around 9 a.m. that next morning, on February the 2nd, his wife gave birth to his son. He said he never had any further contact with Sandra, but of course he didn't. She was dead. And in fact, had blocked her from any outlet that she might use to reach out to him. Phone, social media, she was blocked from everything, according to him. The department's internal investigation spanned a review of nearly 100,000 pages of cell phone records obtained by Cellbrite, along with text messages and a dozen interviews. And in September of 2022, at the end of the 19-month investigation, Chief Donna McNamara released a very redacted 60-page report and held a press conference. The other two main police officers that were being investigated in the Stoughton Police Department, besides Matthew Farwell, were none other than his twin brother William Farwell and the leader of the Explorers, Robert Devine. They were the three officers who basically ran the Explorers program, and there was a mound of information found on each one, and it wasn't good. As Chief McNamara stood in front of the room to talk, you could tell she was disgusted and pissed off at the vile and gross conduct of these officers in her department. She said, and I quote, "Birchmore was failed by, manipulated by, and used by people of authority that she admired and trusted right up until her final days. She was a vulnerable person who had one constant in her life since childhood: her unwavering admiration of police officers, of those serving in the military, people in uniform with oaths and duties to protect and serve. The admiration led to her form relationships with men who were willing to take advantage of her. All three men, the Farwell brothers and Devine, violated an oath of office and should never have the privilege of serving any community as a police officer. Through a sustained and deliberate combination of lies, deceit, and treachery, they violated the policies and core values of the Staunton Police Department, not to mention human decency. These men violated their oaths, and they are unfit to serve as police officers. End quote. So, who are these three men that instead of leading Sandra and showing her mentorship and encouragement, felt they had a right to manipulate her and use her for their own self gratification? And what did the internal investigation uncover? That will have to wait until next week. For photos from this episode, jump on over to the Victim's Voice on Facebook or Instagram. And if you would like to support this podcast, please click on the link in the show notes. Until next week, peace out.